Moksha, maybe to just start off with, I mean, Complex has played an influential role in youth culture since probably early 2000s. It's many different incarnations. So just to get it out of the way, what is Complex and why does it matter?
Complex is really like the leading youth culture, content, commerce, and experiential brand. It used to be solely media and through various iterations. In the current iteration, it's really focused on sort of three core sort of consumer engagement circles. One would be content, and that sort of is across, sort of all of our own assets and distributed assets. And then commerce, selling product to that audience that they love and admire. And then experiential, bringing them into festivals and experiences that are ticketed and are unique to our brand. And it's really, a lifestyle that is centered around convergence culture. One that admires traditional sports like NBA and NFL as much as it does, skate and UFC. The consumers are just as big fans of hip hop as they are K-pop. They admire, couture fashion as much as they're wearing vintage and streetwear. And, this the way sort of media was for many, many times and storytelling was for many, many times. It was like if you were only interested in couture, you would go to like Vogue and GQ. If you were only interested in streetwear, you went to, you know, sort of Thrasher or Skateboarder, these kind of magazines, way back in the day. And our whole thing was like there's a consumer that is really dynamic and is interested in all of these things, and we wanted to build worlds around them and give them access to really engaging content formats, product they aspire to own, and then experiences they really sort of relish in attending.
It became like a youth culture brand more so than the format, right? Like, oh, it's a brand rather than just like a magazine or just like a website or a blog. It was sort of could transcend. But then as you grow and you start doing a lot of things, there's a lot of just like other players who see value in the brand. But that in itself creates opportunities for partnerships, for acquisition, for all kinds of stuff. And then it creates challenges at the same time. And correct me if I'm wrong on the timeline here, but it's like Complex founded, I think, in 2002, sold to Verizon Hearst 2016 because they were, trying to launch the streaming platform Go 90, which was there for like, I think, a hot minute before it was shut down. Yeah, a couple of years. It shut down in 2018. So there's sort of staff reductions, strategic reset. The brand still has perceived value. So it's acquired by BuzzFeed in sort of the heyday of BuzzFeed for around 300 million. And then there's all kinds of challenges with that. BuzzFeed has its own challenges. Sort of Complex has its own challenges. There's culture clashes. And then it's sold in 2024 to Network, its current iteration now, that's shifting towards more sort of like e-commerce, live streams, innovative formats, and so forth. So is that correct? And like you were there, you were gone, you're back. What is like the lessons or the whiplash from all of this that is just like acquirers? Obviously, lots of people wanted to be a part of Complex, but it also, diminished things or created obstacles along the way.
There's a certain rhythm of business, and there's certain, dance partners that can really make a business accelerate. And when we sold Complex, there was certain dance partners here that had been very successful for a long time, and then went into this new entity with, Verizon and Hearst, with really big ambitions and big goals to, you know, really develop Complex beyond digital into, sort of a video powerhouse across theatrical, streaming, linear.
Which sort of speaks to the brand, right? It was like more of a, it was sort of a, it was a vibe. It was a feeling. It was an approach that people felt like it could transcend.
Yeah, and look, Complex has always been super intentional about being relevant to, sort of all ethnicities, all genders, and as a result, it has a very diverse audience, and that was very attractive to Verizon and Hearst at the time. But as it would be with Go 90, their aspirations in sort of media became lesser, and they sold off Yahoo and all these things, and they had the investment in BuzzFeed, and that's when they did that SPAC, when they brought Complex and BuzzFeed together. And just, sort of philosophically, as far as I can tell, how BuzzFeed does business and what's important to them, and it's very massive, it's very transactional with the audience, where Complex is very specific. It is a brand, to your point. It's about depth of connection with the consumer. It's not about just like being super wide and surface level with them. It's being very specific and going, miles deep with them. And I think that was just a totally different culture. There was probably just a lack of understanding or interest in that. And, as a result, at least sort of like from a business metrics perspective, they didn't really nurture the brand. Thankfully, they did really sort of keep pressing in on the health of like the audience side of the brand, so that never really eroded, and the brand quality did not erode as a result of it. So it's sort of all, sort of under the hood financial issues. And, as you mentioned, we had started Network, which was an e-commerce business really aimed at a similar audience as Complex, but, instead of sort of being all content and advertising related business, it was sort of all e-commerce, highly desirable products, all delivered to consumers in a live streaming, ephemeral environment. And our thinking was, hey, could we bring Complex, this great brand, back and ingest it with all of this technology and e-commerce infrastructure from Network? And could we build a really durable three-legged stool of a business that was sort of one part content, one part commerce, and one part experiential? And that's what we got the business back from BuzzFeed 2 Februarys ago. So whatever that is, 16, 18 months ago. And we've just been, rapidly expanding into those areas and building the business up and reinvigorating it.
What is it like emotionally? I mean, you were there, you were, I don't know if you felt emotionally invested in the brand or not. You left for 15 years. Now you're back. Mark Echo, obviously, critical to to the story and the ethos, is back too. What is it like? Is it like emotionally, strategically, how does it feel?
Kind of, I mean, this is going to sound silly, but it kind of feels like, riding a bike again. Like it feels like, it just feels like a very similar place. It's not like the challenges aren't significant, but we have been through them before. And it feels like we know how to tackle them. They're not unfamiliar to us. And the relationship with the brand, it just like, I don't know, it's like it feels very familiar, like something you would sort of like connect with, as like when you go to something with your childhood, you're like, oh, I remember this. Like it feels, familiar in that way. So there's not really there wasn't a relearning process or a re-education process. It was really like, hey, we gotta get this business aiming the right way, and like here's the things we need to do, and let's put our foot on the gas pedal to do it.
What drew you back? What drew Mark back? Was it business reasons, emotional reasons, brand reasons? Like, what was it?
Really like the opportunity here, the legacy of it. I think, one thing I would say is that, when we sold the business in 2016, we all left, a year later in 2017. We believed, I think at the time, and maybe it wasn't the right thoughts, that the business was durable, and we left it in, sort of like really, good hands. And to some degree that was true, but some other factors came along the way. And I think this time it's like, we want to set this business up. We're not going to be here for 50 more years, obviously, but when we're sort of on our deathbeds, we want Complex to still be thriving and vibrant. And I think it's important over the next few years that we set the business up in a really strategic way, that it's healthy, it's directionally moving in the correct direction, and can pivot through whatever changes happen across commerce or experiences or media, and really be a durable, vibrant brand for the future. So I think it's about, this was I mean, it's pretty much and not the only place, but one of the very few places I've worked my entire career. Same with Mark, same with a lot of people around here. And I think there's a pride in making sure that this business sustains long beyond when we're gone.
What is tried and true about interacting, creating content for, selling things to, youth culture, and what has like changed and not proven to be true?
I think with like youth culture, especially if you're not a youth, you have to really be a student of it. And if you notice, if you go through any of our content or products and you look at like the velocity of engagement or sales, it is the things that are squarely in youth culture, right? So like, consumers are caring about streamers, they're caring about emergent hip hop artists, they're caring about reggaeton, they're caring about, emerging fashion brands that you've probably never heard of, like, a Hellstar or Opium, but like consumers are super passionate about these. And you have to, I think this is a consistent, right? Like you have to lean into what is emergent and what young people are passionate about, even on the fringes, because those things will become the mainstream at some point. And then the other piece is you have to stay just vigilantly leaned into technology. If as a brand, if you don't lean into technology and you don't lean into the youth, you're eventually going to lose. I mean, it's a story as old as time. If you don't keep, leaning into what the next generation wants and keeping up with the modality of technology and the changes there, at some point you're going to lose your step. And we could go down the list of brands that have made those missteps.
You've talked about like understanding that the fringe becomes the mainstream. What is the difference? How do you evaluate that? What is fringe that just stays fringe?
I don't know if I could identify exactly what that tipping point is, but there's often like a bubbling in cities and neighborhoods like New York City, or around like emerging fashion brands, or a look or a style of music, and you start to hear them bubbling. They start to get more engagement, and oftentimes they take off and they become, huge movements. I mean, you see this with, I mean, sometimes it takes years and years and years, but like, look at, reggaeton is not an overnight success. And now it's I think last year was like the most streamed of any music globally. Or, certainly there's been so many instances of that through hip hop regionally, whether it was, New York or LA or Atlanta, like those things bubbled up and became super mainstream at various points. So I think there's just like, for whatever those reasons are, like certain artists, certain creators, certain designers, they start to make energy, and then they scale. And sometimes the inverse is true. They're super cool, they're super edgy and interesting to a group of early adopters, but it never flips that switch to the mainstream. And that it's not really a diminishment of them. What they're doing is super interesting and creative. It just, for whatever reason, didn't sort of hit that launch pad to the next level. But it's like, anything you do creatively, like over, complex, like we've created some of like the biggest hit internet shows, whether it's sneaker shopping or Hot Ones or any of these shows. They're not overnight successes, right? It's like they take years of sort of work and iteration, and then they become the biggest shows on YouTube. So, and there was also, for the 10 that are successful, we probably tried 82 that failed. So a lot of it is just through iteration and rapid response to what's going on in the broader culture.
What is your sense, just from having worked in this for so long? Like, what is the nature of attention and getting attention and focus? Because it seems like, we live in an economy driven by those who can get attention. What is your sense of that, just through the lens of youth culture and complex?
There are a lot of super influential celebrity types, or sort of big internet personalities that have made successful CPG brands. Beauty jumps out as an area. There's been a pretty strong degree of success, but there's also a zillion others that you don't hear about anymore because they didn't become successful. Like, most businesses, the win rate is a fraction of the trial rate. Um, but attention is an super important commodity. Once you have the consumer's attention and engagement, you can introduce new things to them. I mean, that's what we're working on, and getting very positive signals around. Like, Complex has been mainly, particularly in its like digital form, an entertainment brand for consumers, a pop culture, youth culture entertainment brand. And now, over the last year, we have this really massive e-commerce initiative, and we have to sort of build that muscle with the consumer who's always been coming to us to get entertained and to get informed. Well, now they can shop with us as well. So we have their attention. Can we pivot into an area that builds more commercial viability for us? And that's kind of the beauty of having the attention. And you see, like, Justin Bieber's wife built that amazing beauty brand and recently sold it. Like,
Road, yeah. So we've talked about that in the show recently.
built a great brand. It fit her aesthetic. She obviously had a ton of attention between herself, her husband, her family, all of that kind of stuff. And, she was really able to harness that lifestyle around her product and get young women to really celebrate it and lean into it. But, if you look through the list of beauty brands that didn't work, there's probably a great number there. So it's credit to her for not only getting the attention, but getting the brand right, getting the lifestyle right. Like, not doing a product that felt foreign from her brand DNA. Like, if you look at any of the creative that she did or they did around it, it felt very similar to what she would be posting on Instagram anyway, right? It wasn't a departure, where a lot of times you see, Zendaya or someone, they go and do, a Louis Vuitton campaign. It's beautiful, but that's not the type of content they're posting on their own social media.
How do you stay authentic when we're selling you stuff? And, one aspect of youth culture is like, we don't want to be sold to, we don't want to be told what to do, what to buy, all these sorts of things. And now you sort of need to do that to realize your vision. How do you do that?
Through a couple of mechanisms. One is through curation of the product, like getting the best product in the marketplace, and storytelling around that, and not just saying like, "Hey, here it is, deal of the day," like QVC. It's more like, here's the story around the brand. Here's why the brand's important. Here's why these products are an articulation of that brand DNA and this story, and sort of bring consumers into the brand, which we've been doing already through our style channels, sneaker channels, etc. So to have a shop channel now is not foreign, and then to educate consumers across all of our channels when we're introducing new product is not like a jump the shark kind of situation for them. It's like, for us to say like, here's this new Adidas or new Nike or new Levi's or new Hellstar. Um, it's not like we're introducing products to them from, Stop and Shop that would be totally foreign to them. These are products they want. Um, and, many times the products are available with us either exclusively or before they're available in other places. So that creates a value proposition that you can get it at Complex first or exclusively, which creates a lot of demand gen as well, and also sort of offers the consumer a benefit for shopping with us.
What can other brands and other people listening now who are marketers, a lot of CMOs listening too, learn about storytelling and sort of what are the important bits that's worth paying attention to?
I think it depends on the brand and depends on the category, obviously. Like your example there of, this vineyard in Argentina that's owned, seven generations deep, and they've plowed it with like whatever these thoroughbreds are that they imported from Italy. Like, that's a very rich, deep story that ties directly back to the product, and creates a visualization for the consumer when they're buying that bottle of Malbec. If you are in, if you're Hershey's or you're PepsiCo or you're Frito-Lay, it's a very different story. It's probably a story about fun. It's probably, a story about energy, whatever those things are, indulgence, etc. So I think it's important that you're telling your story around the use case of your product. And if it's a brand like, let's say, Adidas, it's a story about heritage, it's a story about sport, story about performance, style, history and the culture. It could be a story about what's new and emergent. Wherever your brand fits, I think you have to tell that relevant story, because that creates that emotional visualization for the consumer. And when they put it on, there's a pride of ownership and badging, or when they eat it, there's the sensation, associated with, that aha moment every time you pop a Coke open. Those are the important stories to tell. And I think where people sometimes go off is they want to tell a story about their brand that is not authentic. They want to tell a story about they want to sort of change, the history of their brand and the perception of their brand in one pen stroke, and sort of rewrite the story and the positioning. And you can rebuild and reestablish and, reposition, but it doesn't usually come in one sort of like swift move of a pen. It comes through pretty dedicated, consistent efforts, to move your brand in that direction. So I think it's, just answer your question directly. I think it's really important that you stay really, sort of lasered in on what that consumer visualization is, and what you want consumers to take away, from your brand as they experience it.
So how do you think about time, seasonality, scarcity, concentrating, engagement and energy in moments to accomplish goals of whether that's commerce or whether that's just influencing the culture or entertaining through content?
It probably different experiences for commerce and for sort of like content from an entertainment perspective, but on to achieve virality, like from, like with a video product, there has to be tension in that product, right? There has to be like segments that somehow create tension, that you don't know what's going to happen next, and what happens is this sort of delightful, surprising moment. And those become the most shareable pieces of content. Like those are pieces of content for, you put out 50 pieces, and then you see the one that does 10, 12, 20 million views. It's all because there was tension, which created virality. And all it is like that tension was so entertaining or so spontaneous or so unexpected that I felt worthy of sharing it with you and 10 other friends in my peer group. And then they did the same, they did the same, they did the same, and that's, at least on our end, being really intentional about creating, um, programming that has these tension and reveal moments. They don't all work, but they have a much higher degree of success in terms of going viral. And then to answer your other question, about timing, we brought back a product called Complex News over the last couple months, and um, we've taken a strategy of deploying complex news to big cultural moments that consumers care about. So we'll deploy them to Coachella, NBA All-Star Weekend, Super Bowl, Met Gala, Fanatics Fest, and they crank out tons of content during those big moments, mostly vertical video. And because there's so much consumer interest on the Met Gala in person and from afar, we see super high engagement and tune-in rates in that content. And oftentimes we build those segments as well with some type of reveal or some type of tension. And some of those pieces of content will go viral as well. But like that's sort of how we're using timing, in our favor to create high levels of virality and engagement with consumers. And then on the commerce side, um, there's always something to creating an ephemeral moment that you can only get product. Like, for example, I don't know if you can see this, but back in February or March, oh, this upside down. we did this collaboration with the MLB and Fanatics for the Tokyo series, where an artist we had a relationship with, or do have a relationship with, Takashi Murakami, designed these Topps cards as well as a lot of apparel celebrating the Cubs and the Dodgers playing in Tokyo. And we sold it, MLB sold it, Fanatics sold it, but we had 9 exclusive products on Complex, and it created such a groundswell of engagement. For 2 weeks after, we were dealing with 60,000 bots per second targeting the site, hoping we would restock the products. And it's all a function of, like, you could only get this on a specific Friday, and if you weren't there, it sold out in minutes.
Is the goal of those much like, you see this with lots of, I don't know, everything from like artisan chocolate to like limited edition flavors that are not designed in themselves to sell a lot of units, but are just designed to create buzz, create interest, create engagement. Is that the model you do? Or do you actually be like, we want to sell units of this? We think there's commerce potential in this, given that your commerce focus now.
I mean, that product that I just showed you sold, you know, north of, $10 million. So there was definitely a very strong commercial endeavor there. Sometimes brands do, but especially scale brands, you see this in footwear a lot, right? Like, you've got your mainline product at Foot Locker, and you're doing these more limited edition scarce drops to create, like, oh, I couldn't get those, but let me go get the one that's similar at Foot Locker. Um, so it's some of both. There is a creating a cool factor and a frenzy of that sellout moment that builds brand loyalty back to you. And then there's opportunities that you can have such an interesting project that it can both be scarce and sort of massively consumer or commercially successful.
Well, yeah, and I always love with these sort of drops and scarcity, this idea that like you get to express or create your own personal brand for the fact that you were you were the, like, I don't know, it's like, you were the one who heard, you too before, they were like, the world famous. You heard them in a small, bar in Ireland, and that somehow says something about your brand, of what you did of your, so I love, when brands let their consumers express their own brands through what they're doing.
I think, like, collaboration projects can be some of the highest engagement moments for brands, because there's this amazing storytelling of 2 brands coming together, creating something new. There's this limited time only ephemeral moment where the product is for sale. If you really do it right, the product ends up on eBay or StockX selling for a multiple of MSRP. And if a consumer is willing to pay 3, 4, 5 times MSRP for your brand, like, I would argue there's true depth of connection and brand love there. And then for for the brands that did the collaboration, they get the storytelling and the messaging. They get that consumer engagement moment with the sale, and then they get the halo effect of the resale and all the earned media that comes with it. And it just becomes this super dynamic um, sort of marketing experience, but that really adds value to the consumer.
What's next? What's the next 3 years? And what are the biggest challenges, pitfalls, and opportunities for success?
Like, from a brand relevance perspective, the brand has never been healthier or getting more engagement than ever before. Like, when we got the business from BuzzFeed, the total audience was around 20 million a month. We built that up to 85 million a month in, just over a year. So the brand, and that's a height for the brand. So the brand is incredibly strong. From an audience engagement perspective, the opportunity is to take that audience engagement and build a meaningful e-commerce store, and to really introduce consumers to not only be your one-stop shop for entertainment, but your one-stop shop for all the amazing products that you use to create your lifestyle. And then thirdly, is to continue to build out amazing experiences that give them access to the icons of culture, the brands that they aspire to, and, almost sort of creating the internet in real life for the consumer. And we're doing that across our ComplexCon product. And then we have a product in the food space called Family Style. So we continue to iterate in those sort of three zones. And I think the challenges are, you don't keep up with technology, obviously, with everything going on in AI. Like, the way content gets developed and distribute will change, and if you're not leaning into that, you could get outmoded. And if you are not expressly intent on focusing in on what the youngest end of your demo is interested in, you're going to get, you know, you're going to get sort of circles run around you at some point. So I think those are the two big watch outs, but we're aware of those, and we lean into them, versus, sort of being an ostrich who puts their head in the sand.
How would you describe, just to wrap up, like where we are in the moment now for brands that want to play in this moment?
We are in an ever evolving, rapidly changing, dynamic, youth culture universe. It's probably moving faster than it's ever moved before, but it's also probably not very different than it ever was before. There's always been, social issues and social unrest and political issues, and, affecting youth culture. And, those have created great fashion and great music and great culinary and, all kinds, as you mentioned, multiculturalism with different ethnicities that's made for great fashion and great music and great culture. And I think the speed of iteration because of technology and the breaking down of walls has made, sort of that output of youth culture be, an even stronger fire hose than it once was. So, if I was, a CPG brand or a software brand, I would really be trying to study that or engage partners that are really versed in engaging that consumer and figuring out how to insert my brand in a meaningful way that isn't just kind of NASCAR, slap a logo on it and hope they adopt it, but actually show how my brand, my product, my service can sort of uplift or empower or make something better for the consumer. It's we're always going to be in a constant state of change and iteration, and I don't think this generation is, probably when we look back on it in 20 years, it probably won't be all that different than the change from Gen X to millennial. Millennia, it's just like, it's always going to get faster with technology. There's always going to be some kind of a slight rejection of the generation before, and then a novelty to the generation before that. You see that with Y2K, all of these things happening. Like, there's an admiration of nostalgia, and then there's like a rejection of what just came before you. And then, with just the way technology is, and with, I think we are, what all brands really should be looking out for. I really do believe AI is going to pretty radically transform a lot of areas of society. And, if I was on the brand side, I'd really be studying that. Like, how do I leverage it, and how do I get in front of it, and how do I stay super informed around the way AI is changing consumer behaviors, and how can I participate in those new behaviors?
Moksha Fitzgibbons, president of Complex, thank you for joining us on Branded Leaders, and what an exciting time for the brand, and we can't wait to see what's next.
Yeah, thanks for having me.